Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Innovation Tales. What do you do when time isn't on your side and a competitor suddenly surges ahead? Besides, of course, a mild panic and an extra cup of coffee, maybe. Well, in today's episode, we'll see two ways to handle the unexpected. One that cracks under the pressure, and the other that rises to the challenge with speed, trust, and adaptability.
Welcome to Innovation Tales, your go-to podcast for the human side of digital transformation.
We'll dive into two stories where the role of contracts becomes the unexpected game changer. One that leads to frustration and setbacks, and the other that opens the door to smarter, faster decisions. Turns out that being flexible isn't just a yoga thing. After the stories, I'll also share references and practical advice on how to apply these strategies in your own projects. As a disclaimer, the stories in today's episode are inspired from my own experience. But to protect the privacy of those involved and to honor confidentiality agreements, they are not exact descriptions of actual organizations. Instead, I've combined several projects into a fictitious tale with dramatic elements to illustrate today's topic. Therefore, any resemblance with real persons or events is purely coincidental.
Echoes of Innovation.
So the first story takes place at a large insurance company, let's call them Crestline Insurance, where I'm involved in an audit of a project that is expected to deliver a customer relationship management system, or CRM for short. Crestline's chief sales officer, Emma, has this big vision. She wants employees across the country to cross-sell and upsell more effectively using a modern CRM. Emma is always bursting with ideas. She's that person sketching out new strategies during lunch, usually too excited to remember to eat. She's focused on the big picture, improving sales, but she's not paying too much attention to the details of how the CRM will fit with existing systems. Everyone feels that energy, and the organization pushes ahead. The Crestline team spends over a year drafting a specification. Every feature, every integration, pages and pages of detailed plans trying to account for everything, except of course for what actually happens once the project begins. When the request for proposals goes out, it follows the organization's standard procurement processes and is therefore locked into a fixed scope. System integrators respond, each one saying yes, we can deliver, but with long lists of assumptions buried deep in their proposals. The Crestline team is already stretched thin and doesn't have the time nor the expertise to dig into every assumption. They choose a supplier and push ahead. It feels like progress. But with such a rigid contract, they've unknowingly tied their hands when things start going off track. With the selection made, the project is handed over to IT. Emma focuses again on her main goals, boosting sales and enhancing customer engagement, while the project team moves forward with the CRM implementation and organizes the work into a series of sprints. Now, IT is used to rolling out off-the-shelf software or building custom software from scratch. But this CRM project, it's right in that tricky middle. Complex, but not quite custom. Flexible, but not exactly off the shelf. The project team gets to work. After all, it's just a simple task of integrating new software, adapting it to old systems, and magically making it work for thousands of employees. No big deal, right? It's just a plug-and-play deployment. What could go wrong? As the project sails ahead, it keeps on hitting rough waters. Every few weeks, there is a new snag. Some feature cannot be delivered as specified, or an integration is far more complex than expected. The supplier, with no incentive to deliver more than the bare minimum, keeps on pointing to the fine print of their assumptions as an excuse. They offer workarounds that save them effort, but rarely align with Crestline's course. It's like trying to sail a boat that keeps springing leaks. The project team keeps on plugging holes, but with each fix, another issue pops up. Instead of steering smoothly towards their goal, they are forced to spend all their energies just trying to keep it afloat. And the further they sail, the more distant the original destination becomes. Now the project is adrift, trying to navigate through a sea of change requests, with the business still expecting to arrive on time. The rigid contract, which was supposed to chart a safe course, is now an anchor weighting them down, making it harder to adapt as they face even more turbulent waters. At this point, the project team begins demoing parts of the system to business users. The feedback? Not good. What they're seeing doesn't match what they need. The workarounds feel like patches that don't address their actual workflows. Some of you will recognize the dilemma. You're supposed to use the system, but no one's asked you what you needed. Users had expected IT and the supplier to dig into their day-to-day processes, but instead they're delivering a system that will be very hard to use. That's when the audit kicks in. Crestline's leadership realizes that the CRM meant to transform their business is becoming more of a problem than a solution. Confidence in the project starts to sink. As the audit unfolds, Emma begins to reflect on how far the project has strayed from her original vision. Intended to make Crestline more competitive, it was now leaving the organization struggling with internal adoption and frustrated employees. Emma had trusted the process, believing that by following the organization's standard procurement procedures, they were reducing risk. But now she wonders, how did they get so locked in? She doesn't know exactly where things went wrong, but the rigid path left little room to maneuver. Sitting with the audit team, she thinks out loud, why are all parties pulling into different directions? The project is very far from the solution she envisioned. And now Emma is left wondering, how could it have been done differently? The audit findings are clear, but their impact is limited. They highlight misalignment between the CRM and business needs, pinpointing where the project went off track. They do provide leverage for Crestline to push back on the system integrator, but it is not a complete solution. Within the organization, the damage is already done. Crestline's leadership is now facing a stark reality. While the audit may help them negotiate contract adjustments, it cannot turn back the clock. They already have lost years, and getting business users to buy in again is going to take a few more. Imagine yourself in Emma's shoes. You had a vision that promised to transform your company, empowering your team, boosting revenue, giving you a competitive advantage. You trusted the process, followed the plan, and believed you were making the right choices. But as the project nears completion, the solution has become a source of frustration. Business users aren't adopting it, and instead of praise, you hear complaints. How would you feel? You might start asking yourself, where did we go wrong? Could you have changed course? But deep down you'd know those questions won't change anything now. Now let's shift gears. The second story takes place in a completely different place. Shield Insurance Group is driven by an ambition to expand beyond their traditional model. Lucas heads one of the company's business units, and he has his eyes set on a new goal, transforming how they engage with customers. Up until now, they've operated exclusively through partners, but Lucas wants to change that. He's focused on building a new digital channel to engage customers directly. Lucas is always on the move, whether it's finding shortcuts at work or literally taking the stairs 2 steps at a time instead of waiting for the elevator. He believes there's always a quicker way to get things done. And in the case of this project, he knows that speed isn't just a nice to have, it is essential. The market opportunity is there, but it won't last forever. As Lucas lays out his vision for transforming Shield Insurance, the real challenge is not technology. It's convincing leadership and himself to take a gamble. You see, Shield has a habit of taking its time with big decisions, often spending months just selecting and negotiating with suppliers before a project can begin. That process gives them control, but Lucas knows that they have to move fast or competitors will overtake them. And this is where the decision gets tricky and Lucas has to weigh his options. Stick with a slow, careful approach, or take the gamble, push forward, move fast, and shoulder the risks if things don't work out. When I first get involved in the project as a member of a potential supplier team, it's clear that Shield Insurance is looking for a different approach. Lucas isn't interested in months of negotiations and detailed RFPs. Shield needs speed, but more importantly, it needs a partner who can navigate the uncertainty ahead. Early discussions reveal that delivering in sprints won't be enough to address the challenge. We have to manage the unknowns collaboratively. So we push for an agile contract, seeing that Shield's requirements will evolve and that the market won't wait. The agile contract sets the stage for real-time adaptation without getting tangled in legal red tape. Lucas understands that while the project won't be predictable, The right contract will keep us aligned and moving forward, and that's why we're selected. Things are moving along smoothly until some early customer tests reveal an issue. Shield's products are too rigid, and the lack of customization options means that some customers aren't seeing how they could fit their needs. It's a bit like buying a great-looking pair of shoes online, only to find out when you try them that they're a bit too tight. Sure, they look good, but if they're not comfortable, you're not going to wear them for long. It's exactly what's happening here. Customers like the products, but without the ability to adjust coverages and premiums, they have to look elsewhere. This wasn't part of the original plan, and adding product customization isn't going to be a quick fix. But without it, they risk not attracting enough customers. So the challenge now is to adjust the project scope without throwing it completely off track. With the realization of how critical that capability is, you might expect the usual response, months of negotiations and long meetings. But we don't need any of that. Why? Because we set up things differently from the start, and when you have an agile contract in place, things flow a lot smoother. Instead of going back and forth endlessly or getting caught in red tape, we sit down with Lucas and his team. The conversation is simple, direct, and focused on solving the problem. We quickly agree to prioritize product customization and find a feature that can be postponed, something that is less crucial for beating the competition to market. It's the kind of dialogue you can only have when both sides trust each other. The contractual framework lets us make decisions that keep the project moving forward with minimal risk and no wasted time. Everything is now on track, at least we think it is. We are well into our final stretch, checking off milestones and feeling like we've got this in the bag. But then, because no project worth telling ends without one last curveball, a competitor unleashes an aggressive marketing blitz. Everywhere we look, they are. Google, Facebook, Instagram, probably even Yahoo for all we know. We feel the pressure building. Shield needs to act fast or risk being drowned out by all the noise. The team has been moving at a solid pace, but now the question isn't about just finishing on time anymore. It's about finishing fast enough to stay competitive. With the competitor's marketing blitz in full swing, Shield needs to accelerate. Lucas reaches out to us and we work out a plan to add a second team to speed up delivery. Thanks to the Agile contract, we have a built-in mechanism to adjust capacity, and there is no need to waste time in legal negotiations. Lucas secures the additional funding easily, with leadership feeling the pressure from the competition. With the extra resources in place, we fast-track the remaining work right on time to be the first ones to market. In the end, everything comes together. The Agile contract, the trust we've built, the ability to adapt quickly, make all the difference. Shield launches its direct-to-consumer channel right on time, and Lucas's business unit doesn't just keep pace, it pulls ahead, offering customers product customization and flexibility that the competition cannot match. For Lucas, it's not just about getting the project over the finish line. It's knowing that the decisions along the way have all paid off. The solution goes live, and all the pressure, the sleepless nights, and the risk he's taken have led to something real. And what a contrast with the earlier story where rigid planning left Crestline stuck, unable to adapt when things went wrong. Shield's story shows what happens when flexibility drives success. Here, being able to adjust course doesn't just keep the project afloat, it's what gives it the edge. If you enjoy these tales of innovation and want more practical advice on navigating digital transformation, make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. We've got plenty more to share, and your support helps us bring these insights to an even wider audience.
Blueprints of Innovation.
Let's take a few minutes to define Agile contracts. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Agile methods in order to deliver technology or other type of innovative projects within your organizations with or without suppliers. But very often, the agility is limited to the team that does the delivery. And the rest of the organization, including procurement, follows traditional standard processes. So very often we'll see contract types that fall into one of the two extremes of a spectrum that we can visualize if we think about who is taking more of the risk, the client or the supplier. On the one hand, organizations will sometimes invest months or years to specify their requirements and then have maybe a RFP process where suppliers will bid and commit as a result to a set of requirements, a schedule, and costs. In this case, at least in theory, most of the risk is borne by the supplier who has to absorb any unforeseen complications. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got contracts executed on a time and material basis or hourly projects where the client can make changes to the scope at any point and doesn't have any commitment from the supplier to how much the overall project will cost them. Now, the trouble with both of these extremes is that those contracts create tensions between the client and the supplier. In the case of fixed price projects, there is an incentive for the client to ask for as much as possible when, for example, interpreting the specifications, and the same, or the opposite actually, for the supplier, who very often will, in their response, provide a number of assumptions and will then try to reduce the amount of effort they need to spend to deliver the scope throughout the project. So there is constant tension during the project. And the same applies to time and material contracts, because essentially for the supplier, the incentive is to keep the project going for as long as possible. And the client often doesn't have any kind of visibility that would enable them to trust the supplier long term. So whatever trust might have been there at the beginning gets evaporated with time. In contrast, Agile contracts are designed to foster trust between the parties and motivate them to build the best possible solution within the agreed upon economic boundaries. Consequently, they must provide a number of outcomes. Specifically for the supplier, they need to have confidence for the short and medium term that they're not going to end up with a number of resources but no project, costs that they cannot recover. Whereas for the client, they need ways to manage risk and exploit variability when new information becomes available. An example is the Managed Investment Contract from SAFE, the Scaled Agile Framework. Links will be in the description as always. In this model, the first thing that both parties commit to is the contract model, in essence defining the principles and the approach that both parties will follow throughout the initiative. Both parties will also collaborate on establishing an economic framework or making explicit the assumptions about the solution and the product that must be created and how it needs to perform in the real world, leading to the definition of a minimum viable product that can be delivered quickly in order to validate those assumptions. The definition of such a minimum viable product in the pre-commitment phase strikes a balance and avoids the extremes of the fixed price or time and material projects. It gives the client enough clarity about what is going to happen in the coming weeks and how those actions are going to help them reduce risk and understand whether they're going to be able to identify a product market fit. This pre-commitment phase typically takes only a few weeks compared to months or years typical for fixed price projects. And at the result of which both parties can move to executing, which proceeds iteratively, where sprints are organized into program increments, which typically are 10 weeks long. While parties can choose to have longer or shorter program increments, the important part here is to have regular checkpoints where progress is objectively measured and any course corrections that must be taken can be taken. And this transparency creates the incentive for both parties, not just the customer, but also the supplier, to ensure that they're doing their best to move forward, to create the solution that will in fact deliver value. Otherwise, simply the project will not be a very long-lived project. If progress isn't being made, it will become apparent very quickly and funding levels will simply drop. So in summary, Agile contracts are simply an extension of Agile methods to procurement to ensure that the contract is a vehicle to build trust and support the Agile principles applied to delivery.
Innovator's Playbook.
In this third and last segment, I'll share some practical advice regarding procurement and Agile contracts. And I'll start with risk. Very often when we're doing innovative projects, there is a tremendous amount of risk because there is so much unknown about what the market may need or what the competitors might do and so on. It's almost by definition, if we're working on a project where risk or where the uncertainty was low, it just simply would not qualify as an innovative project. It will be more business as usual, maybe some sort of migration or something like that. But if we are doing projects where we are working on something new, like in this episode, we've had two stories where one was a CRM implementation, the other one was going to market through a new channel. Those definitely qualify as risky adventures because it's not clear how the market will react, how the users will react, whether the technology actually supports the vision, and also, of course, the risk because the actors may not know exactly what the technology is capable of, or the technology may move forward even while the project is underway. Under those circumstances, I do not believe that it's possible for a client organization to outsource its risks to the supplier, especially when it comes to feasibility and scope risk. The reality is that suppliers, such as systems integrators, will be very good at managing this risk on their side. They have an incentive, an economic incentive, of course, to do that. And also they have the experience since they're doing these projects day in, day out. Every employee, every team will have delivered a number of these projects. So they will know what to expect. And when they're responding to an RFP, that list of assumptions isn't an accident. It is a very critical piece of ensuring that a system integrator remains profitable. And for the customer, it is almost impossible to anticipate how those assumptions are going to play out. There is an imbalance in the knowledge, in the experience. The customer is doing maybe a CRM project for the first time in years, whereas the system integrator, it's their 5th or 10th this year. And so this negotiation is not fair. And in the end, very often, it's the customer who is going to pay the price, not necessarily financially because they might be able to go to court or something, but they will have lost those years of actually struggling through this project. The best way to manage risk, as far as I'm concerned, is to use those minimum viable products. One way to do that is with the lean startup approach, where you explicitly identify the assumptions that you are making about the market, customer needs, technical feasibility, what the competition will do, and so on. And you rank them, starting from the one that's going to have the most impact if it turns out to be false. And then you build those experiments to validate or invalidate, and each of these experiments is going to be a minimum viable product. I don't have time, unfortunately, today to go into more details about the lean startup. Maybe that's something I will do in a future episode. My second advice relates to how Agile is often perceived as just the methodology for the development team, maybe because they need to run sprints or something like that. Problem is the rest of the organization may be using completely different methods, and there will be a lot of clash between the rest of the organization and the development team. Instead, I recommend considering trust as a project resource. What do I mean by that? Well, the ability of a customer and the supplier or their suppliers to trust each other and to collaborate long-term is, to me, one of the key factors to be successful with an innovative project. Well, I think it's important to recognize that even if your team executes in an agile way and does reviews, for example, and system demos to provide transparency, they will still end up with conflicting interests if the contract under which they execute creates a win-lose situation. So, for example, a time and material contract can be very dangerous for a supplier because literally overnight the project could stop and they might end up with a number of resources on the bench, leading to a drop in their profitability. So it's important to manage that explicitly through contracts and ensure that on the one hand, the supplier can rely on a stream of work that they can commit good resources to. And that will lead to a number of positive outcomes, especially the quality and the expertise of these resources. But on the other hand, of course, it needs the same contract, needs to ensure that the customer doesn't get locked in, and when changes are necessary due to new information arising, the contract does promote and exploit the variability. Now, my third advice relates to how you actually implement agile contracts. From my experience, the main reason why agile contracts are rarely used is simply because most people in an organization are unfamiliar with that particular type of contracts. As a result, during the initial phases of the project, it's just so much easier to go for a request for proposal and a fixed price, or maybe a time and material, because there is going to be templates available. People are going to know and expect that this is what projects do. It might even be required from all projects by a project management office, for example, to use a specific template for their contracts. And this is where there is an opportunity to create value during those initial weeks of an initiative. You can work with stakeholders, explain to them the benefits that you will get from an agile approach that goes beyond the sprints and reviews that the development team will perform. So let's start with procurement. Why would the procurement department be interested in making the additional effort to implement a new type of contract for your project? The main reason would be that delivering an innovative project is actually quite different from most of the services and products that the procurement department usually acquires for the organization. Therefore, there is a tremendous amount of risk that they will have to deal with, which slows everything down and takes a significant amount of time for them when they're preparing the contracts, and even more time later during execution if you end up with dozens or hundreds of change requests. The chief financial officer might be another stakeholder that might be reluctant at first to consider a new type of contract. So for them, it's important to highlight the way that you are managing scope creep and, of course, the financial risk that is associated with it. Compared to a time and material, of course, there is much more visibility. And compared to a fixed price, the main benefit there is your ability to exploit variability, right? If you are going through the project and you're discovering that circumstances have changed, you don't have to spend resources just because you've committed to them a year or two ago. You can readapt to the new conditions and potentially deliver more value with the same or less resources. And last but not least, let's talk about the business stakeholders, or the people who are going to be using the solutions. They're often the ones paying the price when tensions between customer and supplier arise. So any improvements in collaboration, in shared responsibilities, in trust is going to be an enormous win for them. So in summary, when working on innovative projects, uncertainty is not going to impact just the development team. If you're the sponsor or Maybe a manager responsible for the delivery of a new solution? Take some time and explore how Agile contracts will make your life easier. Today we explored two contrasting approaches to digital transformation. One that struggled with rigidity and another that thrived on agility and trust. We broke down the challenges of procurement and the importance of adapting quickly in a fast-moving market. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. Or you can rate and review the show in your favorite podcasting app. We look forward to your feedback. In the meantime, we have more episodes lined up, so stay tuned for more tales of innovation that inspire, challenge, and transform. Until next time, peace.
Thanks for tuning in to Innovation Tales. Get inspired, connect with other practitioners, and approach the digital revolution with confidence. Visit innovation-tales.com for more episodes. See you next time.